Hey, take your Bibles and open up with me to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel. If you've been reading along with us in the Bible, you might be like a friend of mine who said to me this morning, Phil, what in the world is going on in Ezekiel? Like I just started to say, I don't understand, I can't figure it out, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it, right? And I said, well, you know, Daniel was probably more of an encouragement. He said, but Daniel does some of the same stuff, right? And just to be real clear, we think of stories like Daniel in the lion's den or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But if you're reading Daniel maybe for the first time, you're running into things like statues with toes made of mud and iron and animals with horns coming out of their heads. And you're saying, wow, I thought it was just about Daniel in the lion's den, right? Whenever you're reading the prophets, you're going to find a lot of that kind of language. And I recognize there's differences in how we might understand it or interpret it. But this morning, what I want you to look at with me is not simply the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, or Daniel in the lion's den, or even so much the visions. But I want to introduce you to a character in the book of Daniel that probably is one of the most applicable characters for each of us in our lives. And that's a guy by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, okay? He is the story of a king told in the book of Daniel. Now, I know there's multiple kings in the book of Daniel, and just to kind of go back and give you the feel of this again, Daniel is writing from the land of Babylon. That's modern Iraq. That's about 600 miles away from where Israel is. He's writing there because everybody's been picked up and taken out of their homeland and transported down there because they're under discipline from the Lord for the fact that they had continually worshiped idols and not worshiped the true and living God. So he is writing from there. So the kings you begin to run into in the book of Daniel aren't Israelite kings, they're not Jewish kings, they're pagan kings. But God uses them over and over again, and you can kind of, as you read, see them kind of being drawn to God and then being caught up in their own pride again, and then being drawn to God and caught up in their own pride again. And no one really reveals that to us quite as much as King Nebuchadnezzar. So if you're in the book of Daniel, what I want you to do is turn to Daniel chapter 2. And as we read through Nebuchadnezzar's life, we're just going to point out a couple of things from his life. And I want to do that with a number of different words this morning. 3 words: ability, importance, and glory. This is where pride and humility kind of clash. Ability, importance, and glory. Now, for our students who are about to go back to school, you're going to start to feel that pressure again. Some of you might not struggle with abilities, certain abilities, either academically or athletically or musically. Others will. And it's real easy for that to start to become a pride issue and not walk in humility. Sometimes when we get in all those relationships, we suddenly feel a little less important, or maybe we feel a little bit more important. And ultimately, it's coming to the issue of glory. Do we give glory to God, or do we seek that glory ourselves? Now, I'm going to give you a couple of phrases that work through all 3 of these words in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. The first one is pride is revealed, and the second one is humility is practiced. Pride is revealed, and humility is practiced. Just say that with me. Pride is revealed, humility is practiced. In order for you to gain a spirit of humility, you're going to have to learn to practice humility. That's why the Bible says, listen, that we ought to walk in humility. Why? Because we should be daily practicing that. Now, I know it's an internal heart issue, too, but I'm going to encourage you that you're going to see how Daniel, at times, practiced humility, and you're going to be able to pick that up. What you need to know about pride is you usually don't have to practice pride, okay? It just kind of comes right to the surface. In other words, pride is revealed, but humility you got to work at or practice. Take a look with me at Daniel chapter 2, and we'll take the first of those in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. So here's the first idea. Pride is revealed when we think we have the ability to make others do what we want them to. This is so applicable. You ready? Okay. There's a good chance that you in your life have attempted to manipulate or be angry or worry or do something because you've wanted someone to do something that you want them to do, okay? You may not have thought about that as a pride issue, but let me show it to you in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He wants to know the interpretation of the dream, but he wisely doesn't give the dream, okay? He says to all of his magicians, all of his wise men, he said, listen, tell me my dream, okay? And they say over and over again, why don't you tell us your dream and we'll give you the interpretation, okay? Now, it's not hard to figure that out, right? You can say, if we only knew what he dreamed, and he says, listen, I'm not giving up the dream, okay? I'm not going to tell you my dream. You tell me my dream, then I'll know I can believe you, and then you can give me the interpretation. But look how he challenges them. Daniel chapter 2, verse 1. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream. You thought Martin Luther was the first to say that, right? Okay, here we go. I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. And then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. Okay? And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. Okay, that's a man who's got a control problem, okay? You with me? Okay. You tell me my dream. If not, I'm just going to destroy all of you, okay? Just think about this for a second. Before you're too critical of Nebuchadnezzar, have you ever gotten angry at someone thinking if you could only communicate to them with greater passion, you would convince them? Right. For a moment, just think about this. You and I are struggling to control others too. And pride is the factor that works there. You say, Phil, I don't get angry at people. I don't do that. I just think about them all the time. I get really concerned, okay? Kim usually reminds me that when I use the word concern, that probably means I'm worrying, okay? If I simply say, well, I'm just concerned about that, I may just be worrying about it. As if in my worrying about it, I can do anything about it. Here's the thing I want you to see. Pride works and is revealed when we think we have the ability to make others do what we want them to do. Nebuchadnezzar said, listen, I'm going to destroy all of you, and it's going to be painful. I'll tear you limb from limb, and I'll destroy your homes if you can't tell me what my dream was. Okay. Now, into that setting, Daniel steps. Now, Daniel had been taken down to Babylon when he was a young boy, but he's there now, right? He's in Babylon now. He's probably a little older than that now. And Nebuchadnezzar comes along and says, listen, I'm going to destroy all the magicians and all those who are here. Notice Daniel's response, if you will. His response shows up in this next section, right? Let me talk about this real quick before I get there. In pride, we control people. In humility, we serve people. In pride, we control people. In humility, we serve people. I tried to say that as short as I possibly could because I want you to remember it. If you're trying to control people, like Nebuchadnezzar, you got a pride problem. It's just not a control problem. You say, well, no. I really know best. If I could only get them to do, I'm just telling you. Your pride is being revealed. Right? You say, well, what am I supposed to do? In humility, we serve people. C.S. Lewis once said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. In other words, sometimes we mistake humility by saying, well, I'll think more poorly of myself. I won't think I can do anything. I'll just have self-pity. That's not humility either. Lewis had it right when he said, listen, the person who is walking in humility should be so consumed with serving other people that he isn't giving consideration of himself. That's what humility looks like. Okay? Don't go out and say, today, I just want to become a more humble person, so I'll just try to walk in humility. It's difficult to grasp how you're going to do that. I remember years ago reading the story of D.L. Moody, the evangelist from Chicago, who walked around with a sandwich placard all day in Chicago because someone said, listen, if you want to walk in humility, put some Bible verses on and walk around and just tell everybody that they need to get saved. And so that's what D.L. Moody did. He said when he came back to his apartment at the end of the night, he took that off, and his first thought was, man, I bet there's nobody in Chicago that's humble enough to walk around like this all day, okay? Right? Humility is hard to grasp, but here's how you'll know you're getting close. It's not because you'll think less of yourself, it's because you will be thinking less about yourself because you'll be serving others. Okay? This is what Daniel grasped. Listen, Nebuchadnezzar didn't grasp that. He just figured he could destroy people if they didn't do what he wanted them to do. Can I remind you, that picture is found in Mark 10 as well in the life of Christ. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all." Here it comes, verse 45. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Wow. Jesus himself models this. He models this. Okay, let's take a look at this second idea. Oh, I just lost something, and I'm going to need some help there, guys. Whatever happened. And if you're following along, you're just going to have to take some notes here. Here's the second idea. I'll wait for you guys to restore whatever's going on back there. Okay, here's the second idea. Humility is practice when we depend upon the Lord, knowing our ability is not enough. Let me give it to you again. Humility is practiced when we depend upon the Lord, knowing our ability is not enough. Let me compare it to the earlier one. Pride is revealed when we think we have the ability to make others do what we want them to do. But humility is practiced when we depend upon the Lord, knowing our ability is not enough. Now look with me at Daniel's response. Daniel chapter 2, verse 12. Okay? Because of this, the king was angry. That's a pride problem. And very furious. That's an additional pride problem. And commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. That's a really serious pride problem. So the verse 13, "So the decree went out, and the wise men were brought, about to be killed. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them too, because they were part of that group. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon." Okay, this is right, like this is the final hour, right? He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" And then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. Verse 16, "And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king." Okay, hold on. This is a serious step of faith. Okay, everybody's got the sword across their neck, and you go in and say, "Can you give me a time tomorrow morning when I'll come back and I will give you the cause and purpose of the dream. I'll tell you the dream and I'll tell you its interpretation." I just want you to see that. Okay. You say, "Well, it sounds to me like Daniel thought he had it all together." Oh, look at verse 17. "Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah," also known, by the way, as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their other names. Verse 18, "And told them to seek mercy from God, from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon, that the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night." Wow. He prayed and he got an answer. And here's probably the best way to look at this. Humility is practiced when we depend upon the Lord, knowing our ability is not enough. Nebuchadnezzar said, "I'll depend upon myself. If you don't give me the answer I like, I'll kill you." Daniel said, "I'll give you your answer tomorrow, but I got to go pray first." Here's a great question. You think he prayed with fervency? Okay, tomorrow I'm going to die, Lord, if I don't get the right answer. Okay? Can you give me what the dream was, so that when I go tomorrow and tell him the dream, he'll say, "That's the dream I had. I don't know how you got it, but that's the dream I had, and now give me the interpretation." And that's exactly what God did. Here's a great statement on prayer from the Twitter account of Desiring God. "It is humility to pour your heart out to God in prayer." It says you need God to do what you cannot. Okay. That's great. It's humility to pour your heart out to God in prayer. It says you need God to do what you cannot. Humility is practiced when we depend upon the Lord, knowing our ability is not enough. Okay. Now, before we get to the next one, I got to tell you about the dream, okay? So, Daniel says, here's what you dreamed. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. He says this, "You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. And this image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening." Verse 32. "The head of this image was of fine gold, and its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And as you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them to pieces. And then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, and all together were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Okay? And just for a moment, picture this. Nebuchadnezzar, who was so angry and so furious because he was going to destroy everybody, all of a sudden says, that man knows my dream. And Daniel knows that he did not get it from himself. Right? He didn't figure it out. He didn't work some kind of deal or bribery with the captain. He didn't say, hey, can you go talk to one of Nebuchadnezzar's wives and maybe she knows what the dream is? He simply prayed and God gave him the dream. Okay? That is total dependence. Humility, it's humility to pour your heart out to God in prayer. It says you need God to do what you cannot. Now, for just a moment, well, if you look over, I'll show it to you. He describes that dream by kingdoms, okay? You with me? When he tells the dream, then he gives its interpretation. We'll come back to this in a second, but just let me give you the interpretation, okay? Verse 36. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Stop for a second. Just know this. I'm a little bothered by the fact that Daniel said, you're the king of kings. Okay? But I do note this, that he was the king of all the other kings at the time, and more importantly, God is the one who gave him that role. Are you with me in that? Don't get confused with the fact that Nebuchadnezzar is temporarily looking like Jesus. He is not. There is only one King of Kings and only one Lord of Lords, and we are told again that he will rule over all the earth. But Nebuchadnezzar is called the King of Kings because there are other kings locally that he's now controlling. But we understand that God's the one who gave him this. Now just pause for a second and think about this. The same thing happens with Cyrus a little later in the book. These men are pagan kings, yet God gave them certain powers, even though they think the power is all of themselves. God himself says, listen, I had a very specific purpose for Nebuchadnezzar. He accomplished my purpose. I had a specific purpose for Cyrus. He accomplished my purpose. I had a very significant purpose for Julius Caesar. He accomplished my purpose. I had a very significant purpose for Alexander the Great. He accomplished my purpose. You say, who are all those guys? We're going to do that right now, okay? Because the dream actually speaks of various kingdoms. And we see that the first one, the head of gold, very specifically is Nebuchadnezzar. Look at verse 39. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise from you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth, and there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shattering all things. Now, stop there before we get to the mountain real quickly. Well, I'll tell you the end before we get there, okay? That large stone that comes down and grows up to be a mountain, we interpret that as Christ coming back again and essentially, in that millennial kingdom, just taking care of all the other kingdoms, all right? There comes a day when Jesus is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, not only in a spiritual sense, but in a very definitive physical sense, right? He rules, he's Lord, okay? But what I want you to see are the other kingdoms, because I want you to see what Nebuchadnezzar should have seen, but that he didn't see, because he had a pride problem. Let's just talk about that briefly. Pride is revealed when we perceive ourselves as more important than we really are. Okay? Pride is revealed when we see ourselves as more important than we really are. Even back as far as those writing in the first century, they began to see these kingdoms because they'd seen kingdoms pass through history by then as 4 different kingdoms. Babylon was one of them. If you want to put one name with that, we're going to put Nebuchadnezzar with that. In fact, let's just divide you up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, here we go. You guys are going to be Babylon. Just say with me, Babylon. Say with me, Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, I'm going to make you guys the Medes and Persians, okay? You're the Medes and Persians. Say Medes and Persians. Say the name Cyrus. Babylon is, there you go. Medes and Persians are Cyrus. That's right. You guys are going to be the Greeks. Say Alexander the Great. You're the Greeks. Say, I'm a Greek. Okay, I'm going to do a wedding. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay. I'm a Greek, okay, and my king is Alexander the Great. You guys are the Romans, right? Say, I'm a Roman. And say the name Julius Caesar. That'll work, okay? Okay, so here we go. Watch this. These are 4 names, 4 leaders of these kingdoms. When the statue began to be understood, it was Babylon at the top, head of gold, because Daniel actually said, King Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold. It was followed by the arms of silver, which were the Medes and Persians, and the king was Cyrus. Those were followed by the bronze torso and upper thighs in the statue, and the king was? Thank you very much, the Greeks. And finally we got to the Romans, and just a king to pull a name out of the hat was? So the iron legs would be Julius Caesar, or essentially the Romans. I'm just giving you a name to go with each of those so that you understand that when Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar, you're just one name, right? You're just one name. Now here's what I want you to see. It's a pretty cool dream, and it places Nebuchadnezzar in a unique role, right? But I want to show you what Nebuchadnezzar did with the role. Look with me at Daniel chapter 3. Now, those of you who are Nebuchadnezzarites, okay, you're over here with me. You're the Babylonians, okay? Nebuchadnezzar was what part of the statue? He was the head. And what was he made of? Gold, that's right. Look what he does in Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. Don't miss this. Right after he gets the dream, and right after he's told, listen, all of these kingdoms, the stone's going to crush them, and they're just going to be blown away like chaff. Right? He goes back and he says, I got a great idea. I'm the head of gold. So rather than just make a head of gold, I'm going to make a whole statue of gold. Okay? We're just guessing here, but any idea who the statue of gold was? Okay. That's right. It's a pretty good guess that if he said, listen, forget that statue in the dream, okay, I'm the head of gold. I'll just make an entire statue of gold. You say, well, how do you know it wasn't just his head? Well, I don't know. It's 90 feet tall by 9 feet wide. He's got a pretty skinny face, if that's the case. This thing is 4.5 stories tall, right? This is massive. And you know the rest of this story. He said, listen, I want everybody to bow down to the statue when the musicians play, right? In fact, just check this out. Here it is. In the dream, you are the head of gold. But when he develops this picture in Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, like an entire statue of gold. And verse 4, and the herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, languages, that when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every other kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Wow. How did you get from realizing you were just a part to think that it's all about you? Okay. Well, from pride, right? Pride is revealed when we perceive ourselves as more important than we really are. Nebuchadnezzar, it's not all about you. You're just a part of it. You've made it all about you. Now, stop there for a second before you say, that's ridiculous, okay? Why would you take the fact that you were just a part of something and you've made it all about you? Just think, let the Spirit of God talk to you here for a second. You ever do that? Right? You ever get offended when someone overlooked you? Right? Because you say, well, Phil, it doesn't all have to be about me, but I just like a bigger part than the little part that I have. Okay? I'm telling you, that's a Nebuchadnezzar problem. Right? You and I, like Nebuchadnezzar, see ourselves often as more important than we really are. That's pride being revealed. That's pride being revealed. You say, well, how should I see myself? This is great. Humility is practiced when we see ourselves as only a part of God's plan. Humility is practiced when we see ourselves as only a part of God's plan. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't to be the whole statue. He was just the head. Why? Because he was just a part. Okay. Now, remember, I divided you up into 4 nations, and I gave you 4 names because I want to talk briefly about the part that Nebuchadnezzar played. He made it all about him, like we make it all about us, but he was only a part. You guys were the nation of, and your king was, and what Nebuchadnezzar is known for is that he took the Jewish people, out of Jerusalem and transported them off as a disciplinary hand of the Lord. He transported them to Babylon for 70 years. They left in 586. They would come back in 516. Nebuchadnezzar was a part, of God's plan. But listen, the Israelites didn't stay down in Babylon all the time. They came back because you guys are and the thing Cyrus is known for is that Cyrus, when he became king and crushed the Babylonian Empire, so when Cyrus became king with the Medes and Persians, he said, listen, these Israelites, we want to send them back to Jerusalem. Where Nebuchadnezzar took them out, we want to send them back, right? Cyrus is the one who put them back in Jerusalem. You say, well, why did they even have to get back there? A really important reason. Because without them back in the land of Israel as a thriving nation, I'm not sure where Jesus ends up in that picture, right? God used Nebuchadnezzar as a part. God uses Cyrus as a part. Along come the Greeks. They defeat the Medes and Persians. You may remember that bronze part of the body. The Medes and Persians, their king was? Who made a city known as what? Alexandria. Good guess. Yeah, that was pretty easy, wasn't it? Okay. He made a city known as Alexandria. What's significant about that city is that it's nowhere in Greece, right? It's off in another part of the world because the Greeks said, listen, here's what we need to do. We're not going to conquer by strength. We're going to conquer by knowledge. So we're going to set up a city down in northern Africa and all the way up into Europe. We're going to set these libraries and cities up, and clear over into Egypt. We're going to set these libraries and cities up. We're going to set these libraries and cities up because we want to conquer by knowledge, right? And in order to conquer by knowledge, the first thing we're going to have to do without computers is get everybody speaking the same what? So our classical Greek is too hard of a language to speak, so we're going to teach them something known as Common Greek or Koine Greek, which means it's the Greek of basically the shopping list, the way that people would normally talk. And guess what? Now all of a sudden, before Christ is born, in those 400 years between your Old Testament and New Testament, you have this incredible opportunity, which is everybody starting to speak the same language. Along came the Romans. You know what the Romans said? Forget that knowledge stuff. We're going to rule by force. And it's significant that in the book in Daniel, they're the part of the body that is made out of iron, right? Because they were even called the Iron Legions of Rome. Why? Because they dressed in iron and they defeated the Greeks, right? And then they said, we can't move all these armies around unless we create roads for these armies to go on. And so we have what we know as the Pax Romana, which is what? The peace of Rome. Rome manages peace, builds roads. So watch this. So that when Jesus Christ is born, when he lives in Israel, and he grows up and dies on the cross for our sins, suddenly this is a message because Nebuchadnezzar pulled them out and took them down into Babylon so that they would be disciplined, so that that entire nation could be brought back by Cyrus, so that the entire world would be set up by Philip of Alexandria and the Greeks, so that the Romans would manage the entire peaceful world, so that when the gospel was first proclaimed, whoosh, it could go out throughout the whole world. Are you ready for this? Here's what you need to know. These men were not standalone men, even though they thought they were. They were just a part. They were just a part of God's plan. You know what pride does? Pride says it's all about me. You know what humility says? Humility says, I'm just a part. I'm just a part of God's plan. I won't make a golden statue to myself. I'm just a part of God's plan. You say, well, Phil, how does that help me? Well, it helps you and me because none of these guys knew when they were ruling their kingdoms that they were a part of God's plan. They just thought they were the ones who were ruling. Okay? Maybe you and I have a tendency to either rule the worlds in which we live or to think we can't really leave much of an impact at all. So let me just walk you through that in a more contemporary form. Look at this, if you would. Here's the second idea. Here you go. Here's the second idea. You are only a part of God's plan. This is the idea, right? Let me introduce you to a guy by the name of Edward Kimball. Now, you probably don't know that name, but Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher who had a classroom of hyperactive young men and boys, okay? Now, you can say, okay, if that was my goal, I'd pray a lot too, and Edward Kimball did. But he prayed specifically that he might, by the Lord's power, have the chance to lead these kids to Christ. One of those kids he was so concerned with, He's just a Sunday school teacher. After all, he's a part of God's plan. It's not all about him. He's a part of God's plan. One of the people he influences is a young man who's a shoe salesman, and he's so burdened about him that he goes down on a Saturday afternoon while he's stocking the shoes back in the shoe department, and he says, listen, D.L. Moody, can I talk to you about your salvation? And D.L. Moody on that Saturday trusts Christ. D.L. Moody goes on to become probably one of the greatest American evangelists that we've ever known, but he leads to the Lord a gentleman by the name of Wilbur Chapman under his ministry. Wilbur Chapman begins to preach, and he preaches to a number of people, and one of the people he preaches to is a professional baseball player by the name of Billy Sunday, okay? Now, Billy Sunday in American evangelism all of a sudden decides he's going to quit his baseball team, and he's going to join Wilbur Chapman's evangelistic team. The only thing is that Wilbur Chapman says, listen, I think God's called me to the pastorate, so if you want to do evangelism, go out and do it on your own. And Billy Sunday begins to do evangelism on his own. He goes out and holds massive evangelistic meetings. And if you had been throughout rural America, even just probably 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, you would see things known as Billy Sunday tabernacles, because Billy Sunday said, I'm going to come to town, I'll do an evangelistic service for you, but there's no way you're going to be able to house all the people that are going to come. So you got to build a tabernacle, right? So one of my earliest memories as a Christian young person, I'm not making this up, is sitting as a 5-year-old boy in Winona Lake, Indiana, in the Billy Sunday Tabernacle, which had a sawdust floor, and it was hot in there, and my mom and dad drug us all right down there for the meetings. You say, wow, Phil, you were old. I'm not old. The building was old, okay? Well, I am old, but I'm not as old as the building, okay? The point is this, that there were tabernacles all across America that Billy Sunday had built so that he could preach the gospel, right? It's not all about him. He's just a part of it. One of the individuals he leads to Christ is a guy by the name of Mordecai Ham. Now, Mordecai Ham was kind of a scholarly guy, but he was not afraid to sometimes do some things that were like he would actually bring a hearse to town to advertise his evangelistic campaign, as if to say, you better get ready, we're all going to die one day. And by the way, if you'd like to know more about it, why don't you come to my evangelistic service? Now, I'm not sure how that works today, but that's how he did it, right? And on one occasion, Mordecai Ham took his evangelistic meeting to Charlotte, North Carolina, where a bunch of kids from the high school there in Charlotte, North Carolina said, hey, listen, let's go make fun of this guy. Okay? And they went down to the service to make fun of them, and one of the guys who went down to make fun of them was a guy that his family called Billy Frank, right? Billy Frank in high school, didn't really want anything to do with the Lord, but he wasn't afraid to make fun of this guy who was preaching. But he got down there and he started to hear Mordecai Ham say some things, and he all of a sudden thought, maybe this stuff is true. Right? And Billy Frank, you all know as Billy Graham. Right? Billy Graham, as of 2008, had shared the gospel. Are you ready for this? Through radio and television with over 2.2 billion people. Just fathom that. 2.2 billion people, not million, billion people. Now here's the question. Is any one of those guys more important than the other? Of course not. They are just a part of God's plan. Here's another question. You think there was ever a point where one of those guys thought they might be more important than the other? Okay. Probably. But you know what God said? God said, no, you're just a part of the plan. Here's the thing you want to understand about all of these kings. They were just a part of God's plan. It wasn't all about them. Now, just for a moment, let the Spirit of God talk to you and realize if you're hurt about something because you didn't think you got enough attention in some way, shape, or form, just let me remind you, it's not all about you. The real issue is whether or not you're practicing humility, making it about you being a part of God's plan. You say, well, Phil, I'm not big enough, I'm not important enough, it doesn't matter. It does matter, okay? Because I can spin that the other way and say, you are a part of God's plan, okay? He has things He wants you to do. Don't sit on the bench and say, I'm not supposed to do anything. Be like Daniel, take a step of faith and trust Him. Here's the last one. We've talked about these three words, ability, importance. Here's your last word, glory. And I'm just going to do this one briefly. Pride is revealed when our first response is to claim the glory. Even though Nebuchadnezzar had been told in another dream by Daniel, listen, this day is going to come, he still, in his pride, reflected upon Babylon and called it all about him. Look with me at Daniel chapter 4, verse 28. And all this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king answered and said, Is not this the great Babylon? So far, so good. Which I have built? Not so good. By my mighty power? Really not so good. As a royal residence for the glory of my majesty? And while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from you. And for a window of time, Nebuchadnezzar, in some kind of mental, emotional breakdown, lives like an animal. Right? He is no longer king of Babylon. He's just like an animal in his nonsensical position. You say, well, how is humility practiced? Humility is practiced when our first response is to give God the glory. And that actually happens to Nebuchadnezzar. If you look with me at Daniel chapter 4, it's one of my favorite passages in the Bible. For he says, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. So Nebuchadnezzar says, listen, when I'm thinking right, this is what I know. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? You know what Nebuchadnezzar says? It's not all about me. Okay. It's all about God. It's not about me. I was wrong in claiming the glory. It was never about me. It was about God. Here's the thing you want to know. Pride is revealed, but humility is practiced in our abilities, what we deem as our importance, and what we do with the glory. Okay. Do we return it to the Lord, or do we keep it for ourselves? So I was praying about this. I thought it would be a really great way to end the service today by spending our time around the Lord's table. Because nothing reveals the importance of humility more than the Lord's table, right? We come and say, listen, it is about what Christ did for us, how he died on the cross, how he was beaten on our behalf, how he bled out for us. It is about what Christ did for us. We come to him not because we've done anything great, but because we're humble sinners in need of salvation, right? That's why we come. Wherever you are this morning, I just want you to think about this. Are you living in a way that is revealing that you're prideful? Or are you practicing things in a way that shows that you're working towards humility? It starts here. It starts at the cross. If I can come to God by pride, then I don't need someone to die in my place. But if I can't get there on my own, then in humility I come and I say, Lord, please have mercy on me, a sinner. That's what we have to say.